Hey, good morning, everybody. This is Tony UcedaVélez. I'm going to be presenting application security on a dime. I am the CEO at VerSprite, and this is a talk I actually gave some time ago at an open source conference called Great Wide Open. Ironically, also based in the Carolinas, South Carolina, North Carolina. But the main focus of today is to try to see, in running security programs, how can you leverage different types of open source tools in order to run an actual InfoSec program. So this is catered, it doesn't matter if you're a student, it doesn't matter if you're a CISO for an organization of any size. Hopefully there'll be some good takeaways here. Now, in terms of the actual agenda for today, we're going to be just diving in. I'll do a quick intro about myself and talk about some of the inherent security challenges in running security programs. I think this will be important to really address with any attendee from any type of role, whether you're an engineer, you're a pen tester, you're a researcher, you're a compliance person, you're just getting into the space. We'll talk about some of the security challenges that really plagues a lot of organizations. We'll talk a lot about OWASP. If you haven't heard of OWASP, we'll dive into that. And we'll also introduce this concept, this is kind of a playful concept on the security Voltron. It kind of is a throwback to and a shout out to an old anime series that was back in the 80s, but it really kind of talks about the collaboration that is needed and how that collaboration in InfoSec can be supported with different open source tools that we'll even cover today. We'll talk about governance, development, security testing, and have some closing remarks for everybody. So a little bit about me. So I am actually the OWASP chapter leader in Atlanta, Georgia. I have been for roughly the past 10 years. I share that with a couple other leaders here, Zakia, Bailey, and Guled, who have been great co-leaders in the Atlanta area. Please follow us at OWASP Atlanta or at OWASP ATL. I've also authored a risk-centric threat modeling methodology called PASTA. If you're interested in threat modeling, application threat modeling, this is a methodology that me and another co-leader in OWASP developed back in we developed it in 2011, 2012, but we wrote a book about it in 2015. Threat modeling encompasses so many different activities in security: testing, engineering, hardening, governance. There's a lot of different use cases related to threat modeling. So definitely check it out. Very passionate about that, and a lot of my background is over the past 25 years will be manifested through this talk, through this really training. It's really going to be focused on lessons learned and all the different tools and areas that we'll be talking about. Whether it be pen testing, whether it be secure software development, processes, getting those off the ground in an organization, and so forth. So I bring a lot of that consultative background. Before I actually started VerSprite in 2007, I was working for many Fortune 50 organizations. I also worked for different security companies like Symantec and SecureWorks. So I have some battle scars, so hopefully I'll share a little bit of those with everyone today, so that you guys don't have to incur some of the same scars yourselves. All right, let's talk about some of the challenges in InfoSec. And again, in application security, I've actually had a chance to give this talk before in open source security, not security conferences, more like technology conferences. But some of the challenges that we basically have in an AppSec program is, the fact that, software development lifecycle efforts, traditionally, might be either non-existent, non-formalized, or very isolated. And when you're trying to do application security, or sometimes even software security, right, those sort of things come interchangeable. That isolation doesn't really make for a good inclusion of security testing efforts, security design efforts, security requirements. And so what that does is it actually leads to a very adversarial relationship between those that are developers and the actual security team. So there's this anti-security culture that begins to come about, and that's obviously not a very good thing. In my experience, there's definitely been between AppSec security groups and development teams, software development teams, whether they be inside an organization or outsourced to a third party, it's very conflicting. And so that's what we're trying to do. There's ways around that. I think that threat modeling is a very good activity to not only encapsulate the tools that we'll talk about today, but also to encapsulate a lot of the processes that you need to do to convey the importance of security requirements, security preventative, detective, and reactive controls. Another challenge in AppSec is the fact that, technology, especially when you have a startup or when you have a company, let's say, that grows through acquisition. Maybe you're part of a company today that, grows their organization through acquiring other types of technology or organizations worldwide. And so you have a heterogeneous tech stack, and basically you have a very diversified set of technologies that you have to manage in IT, which in and of itself is an IT challenge. Now you layer on the application security challenges of getting a roster of the things that you need to test, right? Your application security program is really about conveying assurance to the organization that we're okay. And when you have a diversified, heterogeneous tech stack that keeps, augmenting, and the diversity of technologies, even the deployment models, maybe in different types of cloud service providers, then it becomes just more and more of a challenge. So that's always, a challenge, inherent challenge in AppSec. Decentralized management, along with the fact that there's many organizations where, like, let's talk about product teams. In different companies, you have product teams govern their own, their own application. And so you might be part of an organization where they have 10 products. Each product team does their own software development. Each product team has their own software development methodology. They have their own peer review process for code quality. They have their own, security QA process. And then, last but not least, they have their own desires for security testing. So decentralization is definitely a challenge because it provides inconsistencies, right? So that provides another challenge when you're trying to say, oh, we're all going to use this web application firewall for your internet-facing product. They might not be on board because they do their own architecture. So that's another major challenge. Security not being built into IT functions is definitely another challenge that many application security professionals face. It goes back to the anti-security culture of us versus them, or them versus us. Targeted attacks, from out now speaking outside of the organization, when you have an organization that is targeted because of a lot of different factors. Right now, let's take 2020. There's a lot of things going on in the world in terms of geopolitical risks, obviously pandemic risks, economic risks. A lot of these sort of things are factors that lend to targeted attack campaigns. Just looking at our IT footprint, right? We're moving away from a centralized corporate IT to a very decentralized IT model for all organizations that are having to work from home. So, cyber criminals are not foreign to this, and they're going to leverage opportunities for targeted attacks, which means that the defenses have to be a lot more robust and resilient. And then, last but not least, and then this by no stretch of the imagination is an all-inclusive list, but, the supply chain, so I have here open intel and application components. If you think about applications today, you have applications that are really comprised of a lot of different software that honestly came from somewhere else. You have even some of obviously the tools that we're going to be talking about today. You might be a DevOps engineer, and you might say, well, this tool looks interesting. Maybe I can actually automate it as part of my pipeline, my CI/CD pipeline for testing. And but the tools that we're talking about today came from somewhere else. So being able to vet where the tools came from, because the attackers are trying to basically fingerprint where the software repositories are, where the images, if there's public repos for even things like Docker containers, where they're located, and trying to inject themselves into that supply chain so that they can be a Trojan horse into an application environment. Now, let's talk about some just basic sound solutions real quick. Over the course of 25 years, again, I started out coming out in IT, in software development and security engineering, and network engineering and those types of activities. Establishing governance is really important. And what governance does is it goes beyond just simply establishing policies and standards. It really sets the tone. That's the point of governance. If you have a technology community, one of the common feedback that I always have gotten when I've been a part of an organization or a Fortune 50 has been, we just want to know what to do. And that's the classic response of an engineer, a developer. It's like, you want me to be secure? Well, great. Give me the information, the power, the information that I need to secure my ... Another, along with the governance, is the establishing requirements and resources so that your developers, your engineers, your network engineers, your architects can understand what are the requirements for deploying different types of services in the cloud or on-prem. A common standard or requirement might be a crypto standard. What is the cryptographic standard that should be imposed for web applications, for client server applications? What about any sort of instance where you're having digital certificates being used to establish authenticity of even a binary or a client application to a server application, things like that? And what are the requirements for key management, right? So all of these requirements have audience members that need to know what to do, how to do it, so that they can abide by it. And going back to governance, it's the responsibility of an application security team and their fellow security leaders to impose that as something that is abided by and audited against and so forth. Implementation of a secure software development lifecycle is very important. Today we're mostly in an agile world. We're doing a lot of story building and sprints as part of those different stories that we're doing in our agile development processes. And it's important to make security simple. We'll talk about that notion a little bit later on, but simple requirements for implementing security as part of, let's say even the sprint. You're building out an authentication use case. You're building out a shopping cart experience. You're building out a account management use case scenario in your application. There's a use case for deployment of keys or recycling of keys in your key management system. Talking about the threat modeling is great to include into this software development lifecycle so that you can talk about design, secure design, trust boundaries, privileges of actors in your different calls, as well as looking at the protocols being used for information exchange, what inherent countermeasures you want for the protection of information at rest, in transit, transactional validation as an example, where certain transactions require a new form of authentication, through different means. So, it's important to have a secure software development lifecycle so that you can talk about security requirements during the definition stage. You're defining requirements for function in the traditional SDLC. Well, what are the requirements for security that, again, go back to governance, that you can include during that conversation? Same thing for design, development time, testing time, maintenance, and deployment. So user security frameworks, this really is about, leveraging different security frameworks that, are helpful. And the word framework is just simply a guide. We'll talk about cheat sheets today from OWASP. We'll talk about the security knowledge framework as a product from OWASP. We'll talk about, there's obviously different control frameworks that you might be aligned with. We'll talk about the software assurance maturity model as a framework. So there's a lot of things to pick from. And again, today's conversation is really not an all-inclusive. It is hopefully going to be an extra feather or list of, ideas, topics that you can add and take away from so you can implement. Test and test early. That is definitely a reoccurring theme these days, is to be able to go away from the idea of testing after something's been deployed, where it's too late, and then but in shifting it to testing it early. So let me present an idea. Let's say that all of my audience members and panel members that I'm seeing, attending right now are all developers, and you might be. And as a developer, the mindset is that you're functional, right? You're looking to build function in applications and software. How would you like it if someone were to tap your shoulder and say, hey, you know what? I know you're busy with your latest version of whatever magnificent application you're working on, but let me have you fix the version, 2 versions ago, n-2, where you have these types of flaws, right? It's going to piss you off. You're going to be like, I'll take care of that in the next release. Is a common response as a developer, and so that's been the unfortunate conversation or mantra over the past 20 plus years. And so we need to test and test early on security issues. Testing doesn't necessarily mean that you fire up a security testing engine that is launching payloads at your application. It could also mean just doing an application walkthrough, again, through threat modeling. You can go through the call flow of an application and see from the presentation layer all the way to the back end what is happening, and say, hey, have we considered this form of additional authentication? What about input sanitization, just in case someone wants to input some garbage and under this use case? So testing doesn't necessarily mean having to fire up a tool that might affect the application if you don't have a UAT environment or a test environment. It means, it could also mean you're doing some threat modeling. Last but not least, track defects. It's oftentimes, if you don't track it, you don't know about it, you can't fix it. And oftentimes, let's take a pen test. I'm sure there's many pen testers or those maybe trying to get into the pen test field in this conversation today. And you do your pen test, you have your report. As someone that's also been a CISO, you don't really manage defects in PDFs, right? A lot of these sort of defects that you have in software, in your network, in your OS platform, and maybe your service providers, they need to be funneled into a defect tracking system. So that's super important. If you don't know about it, you don't track it, it doesn't exist, never happened. All right, let's talk about OWASP a little bit. So for those of you that don't know, and you might be surprised that there might be people out there saying, well, why are we talking about OWASP? This is ridiculous. Everyone knows about OWASP. And the sad truth is that a lot of people don't know about OWASP. Again, I've been affiliated with OWASP almost since its inception. And I've done talks all over the world, in Greece, Korea, South Korea, and Portugal and other places. And it's always interesting to see, although we have 30,000 members worldwide, multiple different multinational companies supporting OWASP, the Open Web Application Security Project has been something that a lot of developers and IT people just haven't heard about. If you haven't heard about it, let me tell you about a couple of resources really quick that are phenomenal. Well, first off, let me just mention that just a couple of background things. So established in 2001, it's community led. Now, in the early years, very much it was a very collaborative, process. International members from all over the world, members in Africa, members in South America, Europe, Asia. But it's always been community led, always been open for all. And the great thing about one of the great things about the OWASP is the OWASP projects. It's really the projects. A lot of it is what I'm going to talk about today, in terms of some examples for effective security controls or tools in the AppSec arena. But it's an international community. You have people from Boeing, Mozilla, Google, different organizations that are contributing their time and effort and talents into the different projects that we're going to cover today. So it's very cross-cultural, cross-industry. There's not an industry that honestly isn't covered. If you're in government and you're worried, oh, well, OWASP isn't for me, you're wrong. There's people in government that are trying to do application security that are in OWASP. There's also those that are in the transportation industry, retail industry. Definitely follow the OWASP handle on Twitter. My suggestion, and I know that in the North Carolina, Triad, of Raleigh, Durham, Winston-Salem, and now I'm just having Yeah, a brain melt here. In the Triad area, you basically have a lot of educational students that are looking to get into something and have maybe some extra time. Highly suggest the following: is that you get on board with the project so that you can take part in a local chapter. This is kind of a dated map, but there's chapters all over the world. There's definitely chapters in the Carolinas, and even if you don't have a chapter, let's say that you're in a more remote town in the Carolinas, you have the opportunity to join a project, which is a worldwide effort. There's the OWASP Juice Shop project, which is an educational awareness project based upon a deliberately flawed tool, which we'll cover a little bit on. There's the Security Knowledge Framework, which is a phenomenal framework that takes the application security verification standard and maps it over into basically an online database, so that developers can inform themselves on if they have a flaw, what to do about it. So from a practical standpoint, all of these projects live on GitHub. They're looking for more able, thought leaders, creative individuals. Even if you say, well, I don't know even how to code, Tony, how am I going to get involved? I don't know anything about, security hardening. If you can write, they need people to document, to basically come up with supporting documentation material. I suggest that you do that so that you can get exposed to the people that are actually doing the coding, that are actually doing the building, and they might give you an introduction, a hands-on introduction on how to use some of your Python skills, how to use some of your Java skills and .NET skills, etc. So highly recommend. Last but not least, I will say that there is a Slack channel, and that is phenomenal. If you join the OWASP Slack channel through the website, there is an AppSec channel, there's a chapters channel, there's a DevOps channel, there's a threat modeling channel, there is a OWASP Top 10 channel. There's so many channels on there, so that even if you're a professional within a large organization and you want to know what is the world doing about this, jump into the channel. You don't have to say, hey, I'm so and so at this Fortune 50. Here's my specific problems with my tech stack, so that you're revealing the world to people in a chat room. But you can basically ask and say, hey, what is everyone doing about integrating static analysis into their CI/CD pipelines? Or what are people doing about false positives and vulnerability management? Or what are people doing about application layer attacks related to XXE or SQL injection for this particular type of product? So it's open, it's collaborative, it's a bunch of engineers, so highly recommend jumping in there. All right, now for a little levity, if I may. This image here is gonna hopefully foster some basically nostalgia from some of my fellow 80 lovers out there. I'm definitely an 80s kid. Security Voltron, let me explain the madness for a second. So Security Voltron is this, again, this 80s anime cartoon that was basically, 5 lions coming together in order to form this defender of the universe. And I want to make this to be a metaphor for a lot of things we're going to talk about today, but also in terms of your application security program that you might be leading or being a part of. And here is some key points. Number one, definitely all about collaboration. I've been, consultant for, now past 15, 16 years. So almost half of my professional experience. And in going to different places, there's always the security professional that basically is like, I'm doing my hacking, I'm doing my pen testing, I'm doing my source code review. Here, software developer, this is stuff, here's your dirty laundry, fix it. And if you don't understand it, you're an idiot. Or if you don't understand it, then I might just, talk about some security jumbo that, might lose you. And so, that's not a collaborative approach. So a collaborative approach is really about teaching. A collaborative approach is about governance, which goes along with teaching. This is what is needed. A collaborative approach is about integration. So in terms of security testing, there might be, just to make a metaphoric representation here, the green line might be your testing arm. Your red line might be your governance arm. We have a yellow line that's shown below and a black line that's also, on the bottom part of the Voltron robot here, that might be related to, preventative, controls like the web application firewall project mod security rule set. The rule set has been something that OWASP has, provided that's in actually a lot of commercial projects, commercial products today. So my kind of just entertaining suggestion for those that are out there is think collaboratively. Think about integration opportunities, especially in this DevOps, world where you see a lot more integration into automation, information sharing, knowledge sharing, and a good wrapper to all this is threat modeling. Interested in more threat modeling? Definitely Google, Pasta threat modeling. You can Google my name and threat modeling. See a lot of different videos. I actually did an OWASP talk for about an hour and a half just on threat modeling. So suggest that you to check that out as well. All right, we're gonna go into the meat of the presentation. And again, this presentation is really kind of a 101 introduction to how open source things that you can do to help ensure that your AppSec efforts have some level of foundation within your overall company. So we talked a lot about this already, and I just want to reiterate some of the finer points and some of the things that I actually haven't mentioned. One is around strategy and metrics. So I haven't talked about that as much. And so let's talk about some, as there's the static content on the slides, let me talk about some dynamic things just really quick on strategy and metrics. So if you're building an application security program, some of the things that you want to have as some metrics is, traditional metrics, let me provide some examples, is number of true positives found in the web applications. Let's say that you have an organization that has a web presence of 50 web applications or 20 web applications, and you're basically trying to show off, this is what we've done, this is what we've tested, here's the net. Common metrics includes the following. Number one, amount of true positives. You're having a year-end review with your CISO, you're having a year-end review maybe with the board or your CTO or CIO, and they're saying, we're paying for all this stuff, show me something that I care about. So you might tell them, well, we basically have done 20 different application assessments, of which we found 500 items, of which 100 have been true positives. And here is the spectrum of those true positives across a severity ranking level, as it relates to high, medium, low. So that's a very traditional model, right? You're saying that of the 100, you found maybe that are 10 that are high, you had 80 that are medium, and the rest were low. That's okay. A more effective one is going to be related to, again, I'm going to use threat modeling a lot, so you're going to see a point here. A model of threats. Let's say that you are working within an AppSec group. I know a lot of people in retail and application security, largely affected by the pandemic, have had to convey, when you're, let's say, a big box retailer, JCPenney, Macy's, Kohl's, whatever the company you're at, you have a web presence. Now, if you're from a threat modeling perspective, you want to convey metrics to areas that are important to the organization. On time, resilient, not on time, but resiliency of the application, and then the ability to prevent financial fraud. Financial fraud is up there in retail. You can check out the Verizon DBI report. Obviously, that's a big one there. So you want to be able to have your metrics tie back to the things that the business actually cares about. So that's more of a 201 level recommendation. And so let's say you go back and still have you did 100 different assessments, and actually, so you did your 20 assessments, and then you had your 100 different true positive findings. The best way to manifest strategy and metrics is really tying back to financial fraud. These are the types of vulnerabilities that we found that are conducive for fraudulent acts, where SQL injection or business logic manipulation, where they're violating our coupon codes, which doesn't have enough entropy, and we found this out, and this has saved the company X amount of dollars. You want to, as an application security professional, change your mindset from having tunnel vision of like finding CVSS scores, the common vulnerability scoring system or the common weakness scoring system from MITRE, because that's what the tools manifest to you, right? They give you CVSS score, they give you CWSS score. That's the old way of doing things, right? You want to convey things going back to the message of integration and governance. You want to say, what are the things that they actually care about? So that's one example. Another example really quick to end this slide is around policy and compliance. So, On internal compliance policy. So let's say that you establish some of the standards that we talked about before. You have a cryptographic standard, you have a key management standard, you have a, let's say you have an authentication standard, you have a logging standard. I mentioned 4 standards right there that are all related to application security. Then, what you want to do is to be able to reconcile your, any sort of testing efforts, any sort of hardening efforts with those standards. Let me provide some example. Let's say that from a governance standpoint, because we're on the governance slide, you basically have a application logging standard. It talks about what type of use cases to log, what is the logging elements that you should have, timestamps, etc. And you develop it, it's great. And it's actually, you might pull in some things from OWASP, which there is actually some, if you Google OWASP logging, cheat sheet or standard, a lot of great information there. So definitely, put a bookmark on that. But let's say it never gets operationalized, right? You have your application development teams that they don't actually look at your standard. They don't apply your standard. Now let's fast forward to an incident. You have a malicious file upload that happened to your web application and nothing was logged because your developers didn't log anything. They didn't log the file type. They didn't log to see if there was maybe like a file hash that was captured by the application log. They didn't log the time. They didn't even log the user that did it. Was it an anonymous user, so pre-authentication, or was it post-authentication? What was the user? What was their role? I mean, there's a lot of things that you can log in an application. So from your incident response team comes up, they shows up and like, show me your logs. But we don't have any. But we have a standard. So this is again, I'll talk about a lot about this today, is being able to have the integration, this whole the idea of not just doing something in isolation, but doing it with greater integration. So this is the a semblance of the OpenSAM project. If you're trying to measure, let's say you want to measure your actual governance processes, the software assurance maturity model from OWASP has great tools and resources in order to say, how am I doing with governance? Specific to application security. And so they define all these different objectives around strategy and metrics, education and guidance, policy and compliance. And then over time, you can use this as a reporting vehicle, especially right now, if you're a application security manager, a director of IT, director of security, even like a deputy CISO or even a CISO yourself, you would be, very well to select the OpenSAM project to basically leverage as a maturity model, going back to metrics, right? It's about reporting progress and metrics in your program. Now we look at, there's 4 major domains in OpenSAM. You have a governance aspect, which, leads to what we're talking about now, but remember the notion of security of Ultron? The governance really should be operationalized into these other areas to the right. So, as you establish your governance, what they should do is they should affect how you're building things. They should also affect how you're testing things, and they should affect how you're managing things, right? And so this is the integration part that I'm trying to convey in this conversation. All right, this laser pointer stinks, so let me just move on here. The OWASP Top 10. Now, the OWASP Top 10 is obviously very popular, and I'm going to be really brutally honest about the OWASP Top 10. So it initially was a unilateral top 10 listing in the first iterations of what is the top 10 risks to web applications. And it's been cited by the payment card industry over the years, a little bit in the early years at least with PCI. It definitely provides an easy way, an easy win to cover some of the following, right? Injection-based attacks all the way to, look what we just talked about, insufficient logging and monitoring as a reactive control, as a detective control in application security. So the URL there is, OWASP.org, project top 10 there. But, here's one of my pet peeves with the top 10 is that, it's oftentimes used by application security groups. It's like, that's it. I'm just going to basically test against the top 10. If I don't find anything, then I'm good. And, my challenge for this and my recommendation is the following. That's a good 101. I think a good 201 level of using the top 10 is, first of all, building a threat model. Let's go back to the retail example. You're working in the application security team for an online retailer. Well, financial fraud, information disclosure, online resiliency or continuity is going to be king. Those are going to be your main ones. Now, of the OWASP top 10, what can get you there, right? And that's where your job is. Don't just use the OWASP top 10 blindly. It's like, let me just do this and let me sit comfortably. Like this is the, this is where this is where security. This is the pinnacle of security. You want to be able to look at the OWASP top 10, and let's take, for example, sensitive data exposure, which again, going back to the online example, is going to be looking at how are APIs that I might have exposed as part of my web application, how are they protecting sensitive data, whether it's in finance, healthcare, or anything else. So with API calls, there's parameters. Those parameters might be fuzzed. That fuzzing that happens within the application, is something that where a malicious actor can introduce some JavaScript. Maybe they can do some native OS calls. Maybe they can do some file traversal calls in that parameter. The file traversal call is trying to basically take a parameter and trying to traverse the web application, maybe into other sensitive areas, could in fact lead to sensitive data exposure. So my suggestion to everyone is that as you adopt something like the OWASP Top 10, it is a good basic thing to include for what you wanted to cover. And oftentimes you will get auditors and you will get people that are kicking the tires on your product or your organization and say, hey, are you doing the OWASP Top 10? They're thinking from a 101 perspective. A 201, 301, more advanced level perspective is going to be really in trying to say, well, we looked at the OWASP Top 10 and we thought about our threat model and we looked at, sensitive data exposure, and we looked at, injection attacks as our main thing, and this is what we've done about it. And going back to the maturity model of OpenSAM, you can say, let's say that you're a team of one, and you might be a team of one in an application security team. You might not have all the different test cases to test for insufficient logging or for insecure deserialization. So begin somewhere and then measure your progress so that you tell a story. Because oftentimes, you're faced with these auditors, you're faced with management, they're saying, are we doing the OWASP Top 10, yes or no? And it's like, well, I'm a person of one, and I'm actually beginning with what my threat model is saying. And our threats are the following: continuity, information disclosure, lack of PCI compliance, card data theft. And with that, I've mapped it to these. Now, over the next 6 to 8 months, I'm going to do now more focus on security misconfiguration or broken access control. So it's going to vary, but that's kind of highly my suggestion there. So that is the OWASP Top 10. This is just more on just some quotes and people that have benefited from the OWASP Top 10, from the OWASP in general as an organization. So I'm just going to skip past that and dive into now another major part of the presentation is around secure software development lifecycle. So not oftentimes when I've been a consultant, I've gone to different people's organizations with my team. We always say, well, do you have a secure software development lifecycle? Do you even have a defined software development lifecycle? And oftentimes the response, especially with startups, is that everything's kind of been undefined. We do have some activities that we follow, but they're not formally defined. And this is where it really prevents success. Going back to governance. And so, where can you start? So from an OWASP perspective, here's some additional tools. There's a cheat sheet series on so many different things. So first of all, in rapid fire, let me just provide some quick wins for the OWASP cheat sheet. Number one, join the Slack channel for the cheat sheet. It's a great way so that as the cheat sheets talk about, there's a cheat sheet for threat modeling, there's a cheat sheet for the top 10, there's a cheat sheet for secure coding, there's a cheat sheet for so many different activities that are done within application security. There's a cheat sheet for security testing. There's a cheat sheet for .NET, for Java, security cheat sheet for developers so that they can have examples on input validation. They have examples for parameterization. They have some examples for handling invalid redirects. There's an authentication cheat sheet, right? So these cheat sheets are very Spartan. They're very just to the point, quick wins, and from there, I would be highly surprised if anyone didn't walk away with some actionable recommendations that they can take today, right now, on how to improve their application security posture. Another one is the OWASP Application Security Verification Standard. The OWASP Application Security Verification Standard is a list of security controls for application security so that you can use it in multiple ways. We talked about the SDLC, right? In terms of like, you have a definition phase of requirements, and then you go into design, and then you go into development. Well, let's say that you're part of a team, and let's say even you're a project manager right now in the audience, and you're looking for some suggestive security requirements. And go to the ASVS. The ASVS has 3 tiers of application security controls that you can introduce right now. There's a level 1, level 2, level 3 based upon the maturity. So if you're just starting out, maybe just look at level 1. It provides a prescriptive guidance on controls that you can use. This is a verification standard, so it's commonly associated with testing. So we'll get to that part in a second. But from a definition side, you can actually see some of these controls are things that you have right now. Now you might be asking, there's hundreds of controls, Tony. How do I know which one to use? Well, you might have guessed it. My response is going to be threat modeling. If you build a threat model on the application, and let's say, going back to the e-commerce example, you're concerned about controls on, let's say, information disclosure, look at the controls that relates to information disclosure and put them into your SDLC in the definition phase. So as you can tell with this conversation, it's all flowing together. There's a lot of integration. We talked about governance. We're now talking about secure software development lifecycle in terms of the definition phase, where you can include some of those requirements earlier on. Now, let's go to the testing phase of the SDLC process. The ASVS is phenomenal for that. So again, based upon your threat model, what do you care about? I talked about e-commerce for a little bit. Let me change industries and go to utility, or transportation. So again, the big focus there is resiliency. Now, utility companies typically don't code their own applications. Instead, they buy things from like Siemens and GE Power and other types of major providers and application providers, system providers in that space. But let's say there is a web-enabled component for a vendor that you're using within your utility company. And so as anyone who's been in the utility industry knows, you don't exactly have a production environment, a stage environment, UAT environment, because these systems are like literally millions of dollars. And so you might not have that luxury to say, let me just test against this web-enabled part of this application to see what happens, because you might bring things down. So what you might want to do instead is you're doing your, let's say, vendor assessment at a more technical level, is ask the vendor and use the ASVS, where you take away security standards that relates to resiliency, that relates to uptime, that relates to availability. And you dilute the ASVS and focus more on that, because availability is king in the utility industry. And so you take some of that and you basically use it to apply it in those conversations, in those tabletops with those application or system providers. But there's so many different use cases for the ASVS. I have a couple here: used during procurement, used as a governance guide, used as a metric. You basically, going back to governance and metrics and reporting, you basically can have report up and say, hey, you know what, this is the metrics that we want to focus on, and this is what we've done over the past couple of years or time period around these standards and controls. So let's talk about some building blocks for an application security program. There's a couple things. So guidelines, checklists, defining security requirements, static code analysis, awareness training, threat modeling, some sort of risk reporting mechanism around your application or series of applications, which honestly can come from a risk register, and then obviously having a published SDLC. These are some core building blocks that you can have when you're building an application security program. And then, over the course of the talk, you've all obviously heard me say, talk about the SDLC here at the bottom. You can kind of see where all of these different components fit in, right? You matching the color scheme, looking from, threat modeling, for example, is a great activity to do during the design phase. You're already designing for, how the application should function in terms of call flow, in terms of maybe the actual user experience affects how you design the application. Your overall architecture of cloud on-prem defines that. Well, you can do a threat model to see what sort of concerns you have around authentication, around trust boundaries. So this is a great visualization to basically see how do you bake in some of the components that are here into an SDLC program. So if we look at the value proposition of, doing security earlier, the whole point is about being able to discover flaws in design, flaws in code, flaws in just even maybe not even defining a requirement. Oftentimes, you would talk about, we still today, we had a security researcher in our team find a flaw within a embedded device, and in doing responsible disclosure with this company, they basically said, well, you're using the application in an unintended level, which is the whole point for hackers, right? Is to do that level of abuse. So when they built this product, which is, a product or really a very simple firmware that runs on a PLC board, they basically were saying, we're not expecting this to happen. But this goes back to, your SDLC process. If you're looking at how your application is designed, the traditional conversations are functional in nature. What are good people doing with this application? But threat modeling looks at, well, what are bad people thinking about, right? And so the more you have those discussions, the idea is that you want to find a lot of the risks, earlier on, so that basically you can have, you can bake security in earlier and not have to take this level of risk, further down over time when the application has been deployed, maybe has a lot more users, etc. So going back to a lot of the different projects that are out there, and tying into some themes that we talked about already with governance is you want to be able to educate. And I have here some more older projects. WebGood is really replaced by Juice Shop. Educate your developers with an OWASP Top 10. Did you know, for example, that OWASP has a great free video training on the OWASP Top 10? It's phenomenal. It's done by a company that both of them were basically leaders in OWASP and different projects, and they came up with a video training series that you can use and you can give to your developers. On the development side, there's code review projects, there's a development guide, there's a cheat sheet series, which I already mentioned, and there's some countermeasures that these are more traditional projects. There's a CSRF guard project, there's an anti-SAMI project, which is a little bit more dated, but still, good from the developments. I would say most of the CSRF guard is a good countermeasure project. Another one that's a good one there is the cheat sheet series. Provides some prescription measures for different types of things that developers can use. On the testing side, Z-attack proxy, we'll get into that in a second. And then, a traditional one that's been used is YASCA for a static analysis or a linter. So if you're looking for, an open source linting tool, another one I'll recommend
Hey everyone, I'm Andrew Holden with the ISSA Triad NC chapter. Looks like Tony may have lost his internet. Let's give him a few minutes and hopefully he'll be back on and continue his presentation.
So that they can take advantage of your web application. I think I'm getting some questions here.
So Tony, we lost you for a few minutes there. I'm not sure if your internet connection dropped out on you or not, but looks like all is well now.
Okay, yeah, I did start seeing like 2 questions on, so I apologize for that. Let me just recap because I don't know at what point I lost you. Let me just do a 30-second recap. Mod security rule set is a detective and reactive control that you can implement as an application security practitioner to inspect layer 7 of your application traffic. It's modular. You can put it into your cloud infrastructure, into your VPC, and it can inspect your load balanced web applications. If you want a quick win for a detective and reactive control, if you don't have time right now for static analysis, code reviews, peer reviews, etc., it actually is built to look at the OWASP Top 10, and you can test out the effectiveness of the mod security rule set with the Z attack proxy, which we'll get into in a second. CSRF Guard is another OWASP project that allows you to emulate CSRF attacks and see whether or not that your website is actually vulnerable. You have Java, .NET, and PHP implementations of the CSRF Guard. It allows you to see if you are A, vulnerable, and B, most importantly, it is an active defense tool for finding where you might have some vulnerabilities that you can mitigate through the CSRF Guard. It does provide the actual code snippets so that you can uniquely request tokens to actually mitigate CSRF risks. And basically the way it works is, as you're testing this out, is that you have a browser session, you can load your proxy up, you can basically have your CSRF Guard run in the middle between your application and your user browser, and then the idea is to basically have the tokens have different types of security attributes that will help to invalidate these types of attacks related to session compromise, session hijacking, which are part of cross-site request forgery. So this concludes the section on secure software development lifecycle. Let's talk about security awareness for a second. And there's a couple of tools that I'm going to talk about, and I'm actually going to show some of the actual sites. I'm showing this screen, so let me see if I can segue over to my browser really quick. But the security knowledge framework is phenomenal. It's a framework that actually encompasses the application security verification standard, and the whole goal of the framework is really meant to educate developers and definitely some security professionals so that they can have a tool for building and knowing about how to build great secure software. So it's a great way to use it as a checklist. It's a great way to say that if they find a flaw related to, let's say, one of the OWASP Top 10, maybe an XXC vulnerability or security misconfiguration, they can go into the security knowledge framework and they can actually leverage it to basically go through the tool itself, and let me show the tool right now. Here it is. So I'm going to bring this over right here. Here's the actual tool itself. If you go to securityknowledgeframework.org, play with the demo, it basically gives you the credentials right there. You log in, and I'm going to use just my password manager here to jump right in. It's an online. This is a demo one. You can download the tool and run it locally within your own environment. But I highly suggest that you know those that are interested allows security professionals in the application security space to go in and see how this type of tool can help them to query the knowledge base on different types of flaws that you might be facing within your application environment. So you can go into knowledge base mode, you can go into code examples mode, you can actually go into some labs. You can, if you're running your own instance within your environment, you can definitely tie your projects. Let's say you have 5 different application projects. You can then tie those projects and findings that you have into some of the ASVS recommendations that are pushed from the actual tool itself. So if you go into the knowledge base itself, you can look into the knowledge base. I just clicked on web applications, and like I said before, you can go across all of these different types of flaws that, let's say, let's look at include secure transport security header as a mitigation. You can look at some of this mitigation, and as an application security professional, you can then align it to some of the flaws that you might be seeing with some of the pen tests that you're having done extraneously to the organization or internally. So it's a phenomenal knowledge base, but you can also use it for its code snippets. So if you're a developer and let's say you're building a mobile application, you can search for a different type of vulnerability related to keys. Let's say let's talk about let's see if this triggers. Okay, of course the demo guys are wreaking havoc on me, so let's go to. Well, this demo one might not actually have the code examples built into it, but typically what you have here when you query something, let's say, especially with mobile applications, you might have disclosure of shared secrets, or you might have disclosure of information that's kept at the client side of the mobile application. You could leverage some of the examples that the tool has that I know is built into the open source project. If you go on the GitHub version of it and download it, there is a lot of different examples on how to ensure that your APK or your iOS application doesn't have instances where it might be asking to store locally shared secrets or sensitive information and stuff like that. Additionally, you can actually add your own items so that as you're building examples of code snippets that you want to use as mitigation, you can kind of build this as your own. But I suggest that you guys check out the GitHub, download it onto your own local environment, and then play with it a little bit. Now, going back to the presentation, another one is Juice Shop. Juice Shop is another one that basically is the modern day version. If you're familiar with WebGoat, it's basically replaced WebGoat. It's actually another demo one is on the Heroku servers. You can again download your own Juice Shop. What this is really meant to do is try to allow you to go through an e-commerce site where you can learn a lot about injection-based attacks, session hijacking. You can learn about port logging flaws. Again, the OWASP Top 10 as you go through shopping cart experience. So it's a playful but very educational learning module. And again, going back to the Slack channels that we have with OWASP, this actually has its own OWASP Slack channel where if you have questions on it, I know the leader Bjorn, who is from Germany, and his team are very good in answering sort of questions and whatnot. But the idea is that you go through the application, and this right now obviously it's just an application. What you would do is run your request through Z attack proxy and in conjunction with the juice shot. We'll get into Z attack proxy in a second. That way you can, change the requests that are being, the HTTP requests that are being made, change the header information, change the body information, and then, try to see if you can realize some of the OWASP Top 10 attacks. So definitely check it out, juiceshot.herokuapp.com, but go to the OWASP project page, for more information on that. So talking about testing, some quick prescriptive guidance is simplify your test plans. Simplify your test plans based upon a threat model. If you want to test session hijacking because let's say maybe you've had some issues with that. Let's say that there was an incident related to compromised accounts, or going back to the logging issue. Let's say that you're really concerned that you just came from an application security incident and there was no logs. Well, then you can make sure that your use cases for testing really ties back to some level of critical importance for the organization, or back to your threat model. Create a roadmap, maybe use the OpenSAM project, and as you look at if you remember, there was a governance part to OpenSAM, there was a construction part to OpenSAM, there was also a testing part. Use OpenSAM to basically define a roadmap for testing, what you want to test so that you have metrics that are tied to what you're testing over time. Follow a methodology, maybe you leverage the ASVS, or maybe use the OWASP Top 10 as a baseline, or maybe use something else that allows you to have a very poignant list of attack patterns that you want to test, and make sure that you also pull out metrics from that. So the testing guide is, the latest iteration of the testing framework is an instructional booklet. If you don't have an instructional guide on application security testing, it's a phenomenal step-by-step process. It's a good, hearty material for knowing how to test different types of things that, it makes references to the OWASP Top 10. It kind of walks you through how to test different types of flaws, let's say related to authentication bypass. And it kind of walks you through some ways to do token abuse, session abuse, and trying to do website file traversal, where you can maybe try to circumvent authentication instances on a web application. But it's a great guide. If you don't have one, then it's a great start for which you can leverage to testing your applications as a runbook. It also talks about ways to test, as part of when you're building application and you're going into the deployment mode. It's a way where you can do, as part of a toll gate in your application release process, you can define what is the criteria of things that you want to test, maybe a Docker, not necessarily a Docker container, but maybe a virtualized instance of, let's say a web service that you're basically throwing up in the cloud. It can provide one of those critical checks of what you want to test before you migrate to production. Now, non-OWASP related is, this is a tool that is kind of one of a favorite of mine, is SQL Map. If you haven't heard of it, it's pretty popular. It's really, you can actually use it with ZAP, the Z attack proxy. But what it does is it allows you to test out SQL injection attacks. There's configuration, text file that you use in order to kind of build a lot of your payloads or your requests to an application. But this is really good for testing information disclosure, and it's a handy tool to have in your arsenal. The Z attack proxy, is a project that has won multiple different awards over time. It's been Google Security Project of the Year, I think 2 times in a row, and it's a well-supported project. It's a product that honestly rivals a lot of commercial tools out there. It is easy to use. Basically, the idea is that you have your web proxy. You set up in your browser your proxy. You proxy all your traffic through localhost 8080. And then that's where the Z attack proxy engine is listening. And all of your web requests to your particular website is captured. And then you can try to do impersonation attacks, session hijacking attacks. You can do fuzzing. It has built-in fuzzers. You can add different components, like for example, SQL map. You can add that as a module into Z-Attack proxy. If you're familiar with Burp Suite, it is a different interface, but very similar in terms of the premise. You can spider your websites, even if you're just getting into, you know, the whole web application testing. What's very helpful is to know how, you know, the footprint of your web application. So it's very good in that sense to be able to spider your site, maybe look at deprecated pages that are still out there that might provide some OSINT to an attacker. There's actually a lot of training courses that are online. If you want to tune in tomorrow, actually, OWASP Atlanta during lunch hour on the Eastern time zone, the founder of the actual tool itself, Simon Bennett, is actually going to be talking about Z-Attack proxy and integration into CI/CD pipelines. So if you're an engineer or a DevOps guy and you want to be able to have this also operates in a headless mode, meaning that you don't have to have the GUI, and yet you can leverage the command line options in order so that you have a web application that gets spun up. You can load, invoke Z-Attack proxy, pass it a configuration file with all these different parameters, URLs, URIs to test. You can have a fuzzing list of parameters that it will use iteratively, and you can bake it into your test cycle as part of your SDLC. So tomorrow, definitely check into OWASP Atlanta. If you have any questions on that, go to Twitter and check out @OWASP ATL, and definitely sign up for the Atlanta OWASP chapter talk tomorrow. ZAP has enormous use worldwide, and it has enormous also, you know, international support. And for those that are out there that are looking to put their name, hang their name on something that they can partake in, OWASP has been a great organization where you can actually, you know, improve your personal brand as a security professional by jumping in and supporting some of these projects. So you can be a back-end developer, a front-end developer, again, a documenter, and you're going to get, you know, liaise with some of these project leaders and owners. ZAP is a well-maintained, a very collaborative project, and it's cool to be able to work with different people from, you know, China, Spain, all over the world. So highly recommend. So I talked a lot about, you know, some of the features here already. The report generation is actually pretty good, and it actually has multiple different mediums where if you want to, you know, if you're a pen tester in application pen testing, you're using a lot of different open source tools that you might have, maybe some Python scripts that you developed on your own. Maybe you're using it in conjunction with different commercial tools like Acunetics or whatever, but you can generate this results from ZAP, and it actually is not too bad. I wouldn't actually put it into a raw report, but I might, you know, take the raw results and ingest it into something else. A risk register, you know, or an issue tracker. There's also integration capabilities with that. On the fuzzing side, I talked about SQL map. There's other types of open source testing fuzzers that you can actually factor in as a module into Z-Attack proxy. So if you're, let's say, again, talking about CSRF, if you want to do CSRF abuse, there's different modules that you can do just to test for CSRF. XSS, you know, XXE, you know, session hijacking, you know, other types of abuse cases that you want to test, but there's different modules that you can factor in. Now, one of the things that, you know, I forgot to mention with the Z-Attack proxy is that, you know, you have all these other different types of features. You have, for example, bean shielded integration. You can go, I talked about headless mode a little bit. It's great for testing API endpoints. If you just want to find out the state of your TLS implementation for SSL certificates, TLS, you know, certificates, you can do that as easy wins. One of the predominant things that you find with web applications is obviously the fact that you have, you know, certificates or encryption levels. The cipher levels for their certificates are oftentimes not configured correctly. So even if you're a novice coming in, but you want to have good breadth of coverage to make sure that you can put Z-Attack proxy on its scheduler to just look at the certificate levels and making sure that they're using the right cryptographic standards, that's an easy win right there. You can also invoke other external applications with Z-Attack proxy. There's easily a whole entire talk you can do just on Z-Attack proxy. That is why I highly recommend that you partake in tomorrow's presentation within OWASP Atlanta. Again, go to OWASP ATL at Twitter and then get the details on the time, but it's going to be a 12 o'clock noon presentation. Now, some of the things, here's another tool, which is the Burp Suite. It's one of my preferred tools that are out there because it has so many, it has so many different bells and whistles. Z-Attack proxy has really done a phenomenal job in emulating the capabilities of the more predominant application security fuzzer, which is Burp. But here, just talking about Burp, Burp is also free. If you want to go to portsquigger.net, you can download a free copy of Burp and play with it a little bit. Same thing, you configure a proxy, you go to your browser, you tell it to set the proxy at localhost port 8080 for all HTTP, HTTPS traffic. All your requests are going to go through your proxy. You can look at all the requests passed. You go to your browser, you visit any website you want. You can look at even just looking at that, you're learning a lot about HTTP requests, what type of method is being used. Is it a GET request? Is it a POST request? What type of information is being passed? What is the HTTP response? So if you look at here, you have a request tab, which shows that you have a login, for a PHP page for WordPress, and you can look and see, what is being passed, right? You do have to play around a little bit with the certificates, especially when you're testing like sites that have the SSL certificates configured correctly. But it basically allows you to see if you were doing a man-in-the-middle attack, what would be captured as part of a proxy. Most importantly, you look at some of these values here, like log equals admin, PWD equals this. These areas in red is where you can basically highlight the word, highlight the area in red, right click, and then you'll get this pop-up. The pop-up will allow you to say, hey, send it to intruder, which is a module up here. Let me put this in laser mode here. Let me see if this works, laser pointer. Yeah, so you can right click, you highlight a word, you right click it, you get these menu, which is really convenient, and you can say, send it to intruder. Intruder is basically an offensive, tab where you can now do a lot of offensive fuzzing. It has iterative lists where you can do alphanumeric lists. You can create your own list. You can create your own dictionary, base attack. It's phenomenal. And what's great about Burp is that with the portsquigger store, you can actually add all these different modules. I mean, there's hundreds of different modules that you can add on, but that's more with the commercial version, which is honestly not too expensive. Anyway, I could talk a lot about Z-Attack proxy, and I could talk a lot about Burp, but it's a great tool. Here's the Z-Attack proxy interface. It's a similar interface. If you're just getting into web application security, you're going to learn a lot just by capturing the traffic that you see going to a website. Again, you fire up your browser, you look at all the different types of requests being made. You can click on any one of these things on a tree. What I would recommend is actually firing up Z-Attack proxy, having your browser, hitting Juice Shop, and then just trying to go in and manipulate some of the parameters in the GET request. Here we're seeing the actual response, right? So we got a 200 OK, which from application development standpoint tells me that the server accepted my request. As an attacker, I also want to know that that's been done. I might actually fuzz a lot of things in my actual GET request or my POST request, and I get a 200 OK. That makes me happy as an attacker. So there's the interface with Z-Attack proxy is really helpful, really easy to use. You do have simple wins where you can learn a lot about your application by playing around with the spider. You can actually have different tools where it's going to try to brute force something with different lists. You can download the list and then point Z-Attack proxy to that new list. Let's say that you got one of those password lists from, if you follow Troy Hunt and, Have I Been Pawned website, he oftentimes, if you go to some of his sites, he's sharing, the list that he has, and that you might run that through Zed Attack Proxy just to see if the latest LinkedIn, compromise or the latest, compromise du jour has passwords and plain text that actually are being recycled in your application itself. So a lot of helpful things that you can do. There's a fuzzer component, there's a port scan component. So there's a lot of great things to do. You can also establish breakpoints, which means that for every request, if you want to pause the request live and then manipulate the actual header information or the body of the request, you can do that live. And so there's a lot of good features there. So I know we're running out of time. We only have roughly about 10 minutes left, but it's definitely a flagship tool. It was a security tool of the year in 2013. A lot of these things I've already mentioned. My summary is, so there's a couple of takeaways and recommendations here. Is number one, to get your learn on Zed Attack Proxy, your browser, juice shot, easy win. Another one, Mod Security rule set. You want to implement a WAF? Great. Again, use a browser, Zed Attack Proxy, get your security engineering team to set up the WAF, and then start having one person on the engineering team look at the alerts from the Mod Security rule set, and then you try different types of tools and features within Zed Attack Proxy to go through the OWASP Top 10, as a start. So remember my comment on Security Voltron? It's about bringing things together. You bring the OWASP Top 10, you test some of those abuse cases in with Zed Attack Proxy. You put Mod Security rule set in the weight room, with the Zed Attack Proxy. Juice shot from a learning perspective. This is where things start to come together. But you have to have that vision to say, how do I want to orchestrate a lot of my different tools together so that they can work together for a bigger picture. Again, just to reiterate, if you're building a threat model, what are your threats? Threat modeling is a model of threats. Don't let anyone else tell you different. If you're doing threat modeling, at the end of the time, you basically don't have a list of threats, then obviously something's missing, right? So when you're doing testing with Zed Attack Proxy, define what threats are the ones that you want to test for your business, for your application, for the application type, for the information that it's managing, and test against those so that you have very poignant, specific, actionable items that you're testing for, something that can message well beyond your AppSec program. Closing thoughts and more tools to recommend here. Here's some easy ones. I want to talk about OWASP Threat Dragon. It's another great tool. It's been maturing over time tremendously. A lot of the threat modeling activities are the one that really takes the limelight is the Microsoft SDL tool for leveraging Stride. I personally don't like Stride because you're just confounded to those 6 buckets of spoofing, tampering of information, repudiation, disclosure, elevation, privilege. If you're looking for a tool to help you build data flow diagrams, looking for a tool to use as you're talking to developers, as you're talking to your architects, so you can define where the trust boundaries are and what you should do from a defensive standpoint across those trust boundaries, like input validation, greater authentication, authorization checks, maybe through evaluating assertion tokens in SAML. Then you can use the OWASP Threat Dragon to build your threat model, build your DFD. So definitely check it out there. Another simple win, again going back to SSL, TLS related findings is predominant in web application testing. If you want easy wins to make sure that you're not deploying something that has insecure implementation of TLS and within your web application, there's a plethora of different online tools, but this is just one that's from Qualys, SSLLabs.com, SSL tests. You have internet-facing sites, drop them in there. You can even have use it in API form, so it runs on a cron. And it just tells you everything's good, green light. There's many ways that you can automate this so that you as a human don't actually have to make this request and sit there behind a desk. You just automate the call, pass it the parameters as parameter list, which is basically your list of websites, and then have it give you a green light response back that you can use within your automation CI/CD pipeline. Rumble is something that is initially free. It's HD Moore, if you're not familiar with him, who ironically he founded and developed Metasploit. He has a great tool now for asset discovery. So if you want to understand what is your attack surface, what are you running in an environment, it basically is it's Nmap on steroids. It's quick, it's fast, it finds a lot of things that's on your network. If you are, we definitely have used it a lot for different types of engagements, because understanding your attack surface is so important. So to check out rumble.run and download it and play with it a little bit today. Metasploit pen testing framework. It's a classic Kali.org for running the the Kali Linux distro. Multiple different open source tools there, both for educational sense, but there's some commercial tools in there that you could use. ReconNG is one of those tools that are in there, mostly from an OSINT, open source intelligence gathering, as an example. But you have AutoSpy from a forensic standpoint. You have Ghidra, which is more of a vulnerability research reversing tool. You have a lot of different tools in Kali, so definitely check it out there. I already talked about PortSwigger a little bit in terms of burp, one of the best web application testing tools out there. I think it's way better than any of the modules that you see with some of the leading commercial tools that you're going to pay a lot more money from, Acunetics or Rapid7 or Qualys or whatever. Save yourself a lot of money, learn a lot more, and get part of a project, or not even a project, but really a tool that has a lot of community. If you're on Twitter a lot as an InfoSec person and an application security person, which you should be, then you're going to get a lot of supporting collaboration on Twitter. So you're going to save a lot more money going with burp than you are with WebInspect, in my opinion, or AppScan, in my opinion. But the scaling part is where you run into if you're an enterprise that has like 5,000 web applications. But they actually just came out with an enterprise feature to burp, which is giving those other companies a run for their money. ReconNG, I already talked about a little bit about it, but it's the person that actually developed it was actually from North Carolina, and it's a pretty good tool. It has a Metasploit feel to it, where you kind of have to load different modules, for different types of open source intelligence gathering. But it's less about an AppSec tool and more of like an overall organizational security tool for making sure that you don't have tools that are information that's out there that can be used against you. There's a lot of different open source tools that are out there. Twitter is a great, phenomenal place to go to. If you follow the right people and you like a lot of the things that they share, then you're going to basically have a good arsenal of open source tools that you can string together to form your own respective security Voltron within your organization. Closing thoughts, open source is the way to go for a lot of reasons. Number one, collaborative community. You're going to get more actionable responses sitting behind the support queue of a first level support of a major organization that, so you're going to be able to work faster, get better information and feedback and response from people that are actually using it and having the same challenges. So another place to leverage that open source community, the Slack channel. Go to OWASP.org, join a Slack channel, get into a room, have meaningful discussions. Highly recommend. Even if you don't use any of the tools today, they'll give you suggestions for more additional tools. Even if you're basically dealing with native applications or commercial tools, there's a lot of professionals there that have been there, done that, so highly recommend. So one thing, the second point here is that don't make your security program free and open source where you're telling the whole world, what you're running and what you're doing. Oftentimes, I see people that are saying, "Oh, I'm doing this, I'm doing that, and I'm aligning to this." If you're telling me that as an attacker, I'm taking notes. So I'm going to basically try to fill in the gaps. If you're telling me that you're doing these 10 things, these 5 things, or whatever, I already know what your blueprint is for security. So I'm going to find the holes. It's as you're basically, so one thing is to talk about it in Slack. Another thing is to basically post it out there on Twitter. Some things are, even Slack is, obviously publicly discoverable, but not as much in terms of crawlable in terms of Twitter. So just, FYI there. So another closing thought is, obviously it goes without saying, keep abreast of security news. make sure that you tell management a story. If you don't have a game plan for your roadmap, if you don't have metrics that ties in a lot of the elements that we talked about today, from governance to testing to metrics, to learning, you don't have a story. You got to build that security Voltron and show that there's a story. Use OpenSAM as a phenomenal framework for demonstrating here we are today. 6 months later, 12 months later, we're here now. Here's where the rest of the industry is at. OpenSAM has a phenomenal tool where you can do a self-assessment. It will give you a spider diagram that you can use for some of your future presentations to your executives, and it's a great tool to really encapsulate metrics and reporting from a management level back to your management team, so that you can kind of show what you're doing, show off a little bit about the successes you're having. And then, last but not least, diversify your security program by, always having, different types of tools involved, different types of approaches involved. One thing I haven't mentioned here as a closing thought is definitely to leverage the power of threat modeling in terms of as an overall wrapper. Threat modeling, if you want more information, you can Google the word pasta and threat modeling. It's a methodology that it has governance baked in. It has defining your attack surface. It has architecture baked into stage 3. It has testing. It has threat analysis, threat intel hunting. It has residual risk analysis. So it's a wrapper. It's like a Java wrapper. It's a Java wrapper that encapsulates a lot of the activities that we talked about today in governance and testing and even in static analysis, dynamic analysis. This is just obviously the tip of the iceberg in terms of today's talk. Hopefully it was helpful. If you have more questions, here's some places to find me. You can follow me on Twitter. Actually, this is wrong. It's not Tony UV with an O. It's Tony 0 UV with a oops, I just killed it. Sorry. So it's Tony UV with a 0. So definitely follow me on Twitter. I only talk largely about InfoSec, application security stuff. Follow at VerSprite.com. Follow at OWASPATL.com. Find me on LinkedIn. If you do find me on LinkedIn, please just tell me that you saw me, on here. That way, I know that you're not some sort of like, hacker trying to basically tap into my connections. So that helps with context. Of course, if you are a hacker, I just told you what to do. So, but anyway, additional places to find me is my email, both VerSprite.com and then OWASP.org. I definitely love to help. And if you have questions to say, hey, I have a question on what tools do you recommend for this, that, and the other, shoot me a note. I will do my best to get back with you with a list of tools, list of ideas of how you can get cost-effective application security mechanisms for your organization. But for now, this is Tony UV signing off. Appreciate the time, everybody, and hope you guys stay safe out there. Take care.